Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It might be a rainy day in Pittsburgh, but that doesn't stop us from having great guests and talking about really important things. And today is another good example of that. In a moment, I will introduce our friends, Rich Lunak and Leon Hoffman in a moment, but let's just talk about just some housekeeping. We'll get that out of the way. So Huntington Bank has been a partner with us right from the onset. If you don't know them, they are very active in the small business community, but they're also very active across our community, civically minded, very engaged, and always working to make sure that they can do whatever they can to take this region and put it in the limelight. So reach out to them if you don't know them. They've been great partners. And Jonathan Kirsting is somewhere on here. And we were reminiscent yesterday of when we used to do a show right live in the communities, in the banking communities, and talk to people who are actually on the street and in the tech community. So we hope that we'll get back to that in the fall. And Huntington has been an amazing partner. 40 by 80 is our wholly owned subsidiary of the Pittsburgh Tech Council. It's a 501c3. It's our charitable arm. It's the longitude and latitude of Pittsburgh. And we work on things that focus on workforce development. Particularly, you're going to hear about apprenticeships and different ways of people getting into the workforce and making sure that we're not leaving people behind, as well as supporting entrepreneurs. So this is an opportunity for you to listen. This is all about our guests today. This is not an opportunity for you to sell your wares. This is not an opportunity to shout out about your company. We have plenty of options for that. We have muted your microphones, and Jonathan Kirsting, who I mentioned earlier, he is here. He's going to keep an eye on the questions. So I don't want to waste a minute longer, and I want to bring our two guests, Leon Hoffman from Ernst Young, and he is the managing director of the region here. Is that correct, Leon?
I am the managing partner of the Pittsburgh office.
Managing partner. Mm-hmm. And he has just been a great guy to the tech community. And Ernst Young has actually worked with Innovation Works. And we have Rich Lunak, who is president and CEO of Innovation Works, known to many people as IW. So first of all, what I like to do is just ask both of you, tell us just quickly about your journey. Who are you? How are you? How are you doing during COVID? And I can start with Rich. You were on the show at one point during COVID. I know that for sure. And we've checked in a few times. How are you doing? I mean, what's the pulse?
Yeah, so, it's been a tough year, I think, for everybody, and we're all getting a little bit of cabin fever, but hopefully there's a bit of the end in sight. At IW, we are just so busy. In addition to this report, we're releasing our annual community report, and we have a bunch of higher profile events, including an AI and robotics venture fair, the healthcare safety challenge with the Jewish Healthcare Foundation, a reverse pitch competition with investors and regional startups. So we've been really busy, and I despite the impacts of COVID-19 on our economy, I remain really bullish about the momentum in our startup community here.
Did you mention the Hardware Cup?
Yeah, and the Hardware Cup, we have a bunch of different challenges. So it moved from, I would say, less of a region by region focused competition to more of a sector focused competition. And over the next month, I think we have 4 or 5 of the vertical focused competitions. In fact, we had one yesterday afternoon, and around consumer products, I think, and then we have one in the life sciences and a few other sectors coming up. So keep your eyes open for those as well.
See, I'm keeping track of you. Okay,
yes, you are.
Track of all the work that you're doing. So thank you for that. So Leon, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're actually doing during this interesting time.
Thanks, Audrey, and thanks for the opportunity to join today. I would echo Rich's sentiments. It's obviously been a tough year. I would say that from an optimism standpoint, it's been a while since I've been this optimistic about the coming out on the other end. I think for my firm, we're a professional services firm. You know us as a audit and tax firm. We do consulting work as well. We've been able to deliver on our client commitments, which has just been a testament to our people. But you see, I'm still at home, right? And I'm sure many of you are. So we're definitely a culture that likes to be together in person. So we are looking forward to those days. And we've had to change a lot this year. One of our marquee programs, the Entrepreneur of the Year program, which typically is very much in person and just a great showcase of Pittsburgh and the surrounding area in terms of what's happening in the entrepreneurial space, had to go virtual this year. So a lot of changes. We feel like we've persevered and are looking forward to coming out here on the other end.
That's great. So listen, let's get to some of what you just released. You released a report, and I know that we put it in the chat. You released a report. I believe, Rich, this is the 9th year that you've released this report. And there's a lot of information in there. So I don't know how either of you want to sort of, address where you want to start. What are some of the key findings? We have a bunch of questions, but how about like setting the stage? And Rich, you've been involved in this report for 9 years yourself as well.
Yeah, it's it's data that we had tried to track for many years at InnovationWorks, just to inform our strategies of how to help the region's entrepreneurial community. And so, we want to know where people are raising follow-on funding, where the gaps are, and how we could potentially do outreach to help drive an increase in angel investing or corporate or VC investing, and geographically where all those dollars are coming from. And so EY has always had such a strong commitment with their Entrepreneur of the Year awards, and obviously tremendous rigor and analytics in the work that they do, that they just became a natural partner. And I have to give such a huge shout out to them this year. As you know, the report had generally been a PDF document that we could print or someone could read, but their team just did a terrific job making it an interactive.
It is. It's
website,
animated.
and you can drill into the data. So there, I can't say enough for what they've added to this process and been terrific partners over the years.
It's amazing what we can do at home, right?
Yes.
Rich and I have joked that it only took a global pandemic for us to bring this into the modern time. So,
so what do you think? Like, what do you think at the high level? What did we learn? And then we're going to drill into some of the data, because there's a story there. So, if you want to just talk about this 9-10 year framework, what has this decade brought? What have you learned?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and Rich, you can jump in here. And it has been 9 years, and we're obviously very proud to partner with the team at Rich, or at the InnovationWorks, Rich and his whole team. And there's a lot of people that create this report, so I want to give them a thank you here too. But I think I look at it and I step back, and Rich and I have talked about this whenever we were preparing the 2020 report last year. There was just a tremendous amount of uncertainty, right? And I think if you would have asked us at the time how we thought this report would have looked like 12 months from now, we would have signed up for this all day, every day, right? Because the reality was there was just so much uncertainty about business conditions, the extent of the pandemic, what impact that would have on capital, right? I mean, that's obviously a big part of what you're seeing here. And I think what we learned is that those first few months were rough. There was no question about it. I think capital got tighter for sure, but obviously there's been a great deal of stimulus across the globe that has helped free up capital. And I think what we saw from a trending perspective is that 2020 was a great year. Nearly $1 billion of investment, which is the second highest since we've been looking at this in a global pandemic. So, I think that would be my one broad observation, that I think we should be proud of these results in a year that was really a challenging year for everybody by all accounts.
There were a bunch of companies, right, Rich, that closed right at the onset of the shutdown.
Yeah, they were. And then, as you know, things sort of fell off a cliff a little bit in the second quarter. Venture funds were more likely to do follow-on investments and worry about their existing portfolio companies versus looking at new deals. And angel investors, for example, saw a lot of their portfolios in the public markets and things like that drop and were less likely to do investment. So it was a really bad time where term sheets were withdrawn in the 11th hour for startup companies, and everybody was looking at, all the impacts that you have in terms of revenues and your supply chains and other things being impacted. We're still feeling, the effects of that. And we shouldn't be Pollyanna, but like Leon said, it's remarkable. And it just shows the tenacity of our region's entrepreneurs and the vibrancy to the fact that even with that, we were able to post the second best year over the last decade since we've been looking at that. And the only other big sort of trend and takeaway I wanted to maybe punch home is the 10-year trend is undeniably positive and showing growth for our region. And, obviously there are peaks and valleys in any given year, and the numbers may go up and down. But if you look at the 10-year trend, both in terms of number of deals and the dollars, we're showing a great trajectory, and I'm bullish about the momentum we have here.
So can we dive into some of the trends now that you've sort of told the macro? Let's try to drill in a little bit, because there is data in there that's somewhat telling. So can we talk about that? Can you want to isolate it by the categories that you've broken it out, the report in? I mean, because, obviously you went back and you did robotics and hardware, you've done life sciences consistently, software, which is a wide bucket, and, life sciences. So talk a little bit about some of those trends, because I like the way you've broken it out, that you have real dollars and then you have unique number of companies.
Yeah. Leon, do you want to start? And I can.
Yeah, no, sure, Rich. Yeah, Audrey, I think obviously the automation and robotics sector has gotten a ton of publicity of late, and very well so deserved, quite frankly. I mean, there's been a lot of big transactions, bigger transactions than we've seen in that I can remember, quite frankly, in terms of dollars invested. If you think about Aurora, Argo, just over the last few years, I mean, these have just been tremendous deals. So when you look at the data, clearly from a dollars funded perspective, that sector gets the majority of the funding. I think there's also an undercurrent there that the life sciences and software sectors still remain incredibly strong. And in fact, in 2020, the dollars raised by those companies was higher than 2019. Obviously smaller,
Right.
but nonetheless very important, right? And just the overall ecosystem. But when you look at the AI and robotics sector, those companies are big companies, and those companies are doing some fantastic things. And I think the future is very bright for those companies, and the future is very bright for those companies here in Pittsburgh, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So
And
go on.
And I was just going to say, from a deal, so if you look at those sectors by a percentage of the deals, not dollars, software and the life sciences and robotics and AI have all grown in that period of time. And we have a pretty good balance. In fact, if you look at, say, the top 10 deals, they're pretty evenly divided among life sciences, software, and robotics. And obviously, some of those rounds are bigger than others. But the other really encouraging thing is, it wasn't that long ago where you could probably count on one hand the number of companies that were raising rounds larger than, say, 15 or $20 million. And that list of growth equity investments in regional companies has really expanded. And tended to drive our total dollars for the region northward.
So, you've kept your eye on this, Rich, and obviously same with you, Leon. The number of, or the percentage of companies and VCs that invest in Pittsburgh that are outside of Pittsburgh. How are we doing? I like the way you have a map on there,
Yeah.
and then you put an international map on the one slide, and you can drill in and see who these investors are. So how
Yes.
are we doing that way? So you did like a concentric circles around Pittsburgh and then the Midwest, and then went out and then went to the West Coast. What
Yeah,
percent?
so over the last 5 years, we've had over 300 investors from around the world investing into local startup companies. And in 2020, 42 of those were first-time investors in Pittsburgh. And that is really key, because what that means is you now have 42 larger funds with a partner that's regularly, in a non-COVID time, would probably be coming to town for board meetings on a quarterly, if not monthly basis to work with those companies, and has shown a propensity or interest in Pittsburgh area deals. And so it's a lot easier to introduce those investors into additional deals. And, as an example, Bain Capital years ago created a lot of news when they invested in precision therapeutics. And it wasn't too long before they invested and led around in Dynamics, and then Four Moms. And, suddenly they have a big portfolio in the Pittsburgh region. And I think, my hope is that we have an opportunity with a lot of these first-time investors in 2020 to hopefully show them what our region has to offer, and build off of it and secure more and more of those dollars.
Yeah, that's a good number. That's a good number. I don't know how that is compared over time, but definitely percentage-wise, that's a good number. It's just, hopefully it becomes contagious.
Agreed.
One thing that I want to say, and you guys can refute me on this or not, is that it seems with the big investments in some of these companies that Leon talked about, like the robotics companies, and listen, we've been doing robotics for almost 4 decades. So, we're finally at the place where people are seeing this commercialization and the translational, research get into the world. Do you think that this could be an inflection point in terms of maybe bigger companies having different signs on our city skyline? Because it's probably time for us to have a little bit of presence with some of these these newer companies. I'm excited by it. That's what I extract from it. I extract that there's big money, and then my second part of the question will be corporate investments, because I've seen a change, and your data reinforces the change in corporate and strategic investment. So I feel like this is happening, and it's really based on just the work that we do at the Tech Council, because you can extract patterns. What do you both think about that?
I am excited as well, right? I mean, I think you look at it and it's clearly, you think about, to your point, Audrey, it's been 4 decades. We have the great benefit of being in the backyard of some absolutely wonderful universities, CMU and Pitt, just to name a couple, that really have kind of spurred that innovation. And again, when I look at this, that would be a fantastic outcome, right? Is if we're ultimately viewed as kind of a robotics hub, so to speak, right? Which I think we already are. It's just getting one of these companies to, whether it's go public or whether it's continue to get deeper roots, right? And to your point, get their name up on top of a building. I think that day will come. If I knew when, I wouldn't be doing this, but I do think that day will come.
Well, I think the trends point to it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that trends follow a certain trajectory, but it's a 10-year slice that you're talking about. That's really it. So what about corporate? What about this corporate? You can see corporate, and particularly before COVID, right? I just look at the slide off of COVID.
So that. The increase in corporate dollars, I would say, has been a big driver of our local numbers, and in some ways is fairly consistent with a national trend towards that is in fact the fastest growing segment of venture capital nationally. And part of the drivers are, I think are fairly obvious is, where, decades ago, right, companies would just naturally invest 15% of their revenues into their own internal R&D and look for that for innovation. More and more of those investments have lowered, and they look more towards open innovation and M&A and other types of activities to drive innovation and top line growth. And a lot of that now is happening in the form of startup investments and corporate venture funds. And they can either be set up on balance sheet or off balance sheet. But, here locally, you've seen companies like Ford and VW and Audi and Delphi invest heavily, for example, in the autonomous vehicle space, but then also into, a lot of regional startups. And that goes across the board, whether it's, Smith and Nephew and the life sciences setting up roots here, or, Amazon having, with their Alexa fund, having invested in a number of local companies and acquiring some of our local startups. So it's, I think it's a great trend. And just along those lines, the fact that we have so many corporate anchors here now as a part of either those investments or acquisitions, I think is a big driver in our regional tech ecosystem as well.
So what about IPOs? I mean, because we historically have not. You compare Salt Lake City, a smaller place, and they really had a lot of activity. So do you think that matters?
I was going to say, the numbers are the numbers. We haven't had IPO activity in some time. I do think, again, if you look at the trends, IPOs don't happen overnight. I think one of the trends we didn't talk about was the exit proceeds. And if you look at that data, we've had close to $15 billion of exit proceeds. Now, granted, none of those were in IPOs, and that $15 billion was over the last 9 years, but $15 billion of exit proceeds, about $4 billion of that was in 2020. So IPOs are big transactions, and the trend there that you're seeing, particularly with the $4 billion of exit proceeds in 2020, I think is a really positive sign that we are tracking towards that, right, in terms of an IPO. And I do think it's I do think it's important. I think it's important. Just obviously, public companies have back office functions and talent that other companies don't need. So I think establishing that here in this region, I think is the next step for sure.
Yeah, I think that fills the gap for some of the developmental needs of startups, right? Because we don't sit with that nicely in our region, even though it's growing. It's definitely growing, and you're starting to see that kind of traction. So what are some of the most notable deals that you think that maybe, I can put you on the spot on, and, who might IPO first? Is there anything you want to sort of play with? I like to bet when I know I win, but.
Well, Audrey, I'm looking for another company like Duolingo to appear on a Saturday Night Live skit. I think that's.
Oh yeah, they already did that, right? So we want someone else. Okay.
But if you look at some of our bigger rounds in 2020, you had robotics companies like Aurora and Seagrid raise significant rounds. You had stalwarts in the software space like Duolingo and Niche raise really big rounds.
Yeah,
and both of them are very fast growing. And then life science companies like Peptologics and Canop Biosciences. So, and you could make a case almost for any one of those that, these are companies with enormous market opportunities that are growing quickly and have that kind of IPO potential. Whether it'll happen, that's a very high bar, but keep in mind, I hope it happens, because I think when you look at some of the other big startup and entrepreneurial communities nationally, some of the big drivers have been when you had those astronomical successes that just create
absolutely.
their own universe. And whether it's, Amazon and Microsoft in Seattle, or Dell in Austin, or a bunch of other
Groupon.
examples
Yeah.
like that, they really drive things. So I hope it happens, and I think we have some legitimate contenders for that.
Mhm. I mean, I think the biggest thing for that is prosperity and wealth for the people that are here in Pittsburgh, and then it just starts to grow exponentially. And that's the piece that we've been waiting for, right? For that
Yes.
kind of, excitement. Now, we have had people who have had some good exits, right? That, and they stay in the region, and they are trying to start up new funds even, right? So what about some of the new proliferation of some local funds? It doesn't mean that they're just going to have to invest local, but there seems to be this post-COVID, although we're not COVID kind of surge in investments. We have them on our show. We've talked to them.
Yes.
There's a lot of excitement around that. What's your reaction to all that?
Yeah, all positive, right? I think, one of the things, if you look at in our report, we track closely what we call the dry powder in terms of the amount of funding available here in the market. And that's been something that has trended down, right, over the last few years. But post our report, post 12/31/2020, there's been some great activity there, right? And you're right, Audrey. You had, I think you had, I know you had Black Tech Nation Ventures on, which is really doing some fantastic things. And
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, these funds are backed by folks that have a lot of experience and have had success before, right? And I think that's a very, very important thing, because that's those sorts of funds will do well, right? And having that capital available here in the region is great for our startup companies for sure.
So can we talk about SPACs? And just tell everyone, Leon, you want to talk about that? And
Yeah, sure.
Operant definition of a SPAC.
Yeah, so a SPAC is incredibly hot investment vehicle right now, and special purpose acquisition company.
Mhm.
And essentially, it's the way I think about it, it's almost a reverse merger. So you have a group of sponsors that go out, raise capital through a publicly traded stock. So they raise the capital before they even know what their operations are going to be, right? So they say they raise $300 million, and they have a time period to essentially go out and acquire a company with that $300 million to then be the actual operating company go forward. Just a little tidbit: SPACs this year already, in terms of the amount raised for SPACs, has exceeded all of last year.
Right.
So 2.5 months in or so, we're already over last, which is just absolutely incredible. And where I think this is important to the region is you see these SPACs making a lot of, just because given their structure, it's easier to make smaller companies public. It's less onerous. It's just requires less financial information, so on and so forth. So, I think this is an area that I'm watching closely. I know there's a lot of things percolating even here in the Pittsburgh market.
Mhm.
And although it may not be a traditional IPO, if a company is acquired by a SPAC, they become a public company, which, back to our conversation before, I think great things for the area. So
I think it might be a new tool. I think that's what people are saying, and the amount of inbound inquiries I've had on SPACs alone makes me think it's just astronomical opportunity. So what do you think that I failed to ask you that you wanted to get your point across on? Is there anything that you think you want to wrap up and say? First of all, definitely become an entrepreneur. We can go through that, Rich. But what do you think that maybe I overlooked and you want to make sure that people understand what's happening? Is there anything?
So to me, it's probably those longer term trends that that are really positive for the region. The other thing is, one thing we didn't note that I think was meaningful is I'll give a shout out to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. When the pandemic hit, there were a lot of programs introduced to help small businesses, but for a number of reasons, they didn't work as well for startups because of the way, startups can't service debt and aren't cash flow positive and things like that. So the state stepped in and provided support to the state's venture community, and as well as partners like the Ben Franklin Technology Partners, and that really helped close to 60 regional companies through that downturn and helped them extend their runway and cash payroll. So kudos to them, and I just want to give a shout out to the state for helping to support our region's companies.
That's good. Leon, do you have any final words?
I would just put a plug in if you're in our report, don't skip the section what people are saying. I think it's really cool to see what other venture capital firms are saying, as well as local startups. I'm a Pittsburgher all my life, and when I see things like hard work is in our DNA and the quality of life here is fantastic, it just puts a smile on my face. So I would just I'd end on that note that it's well worth a couple minutes of reading those quotes. So.
Well, that's great. So go to the report and put the link out. It's easy to find. I think it's on, is it in the IW site as well as the E&Y site? We put it out there. So if you have any problems with it, just let us know. But the report is out there. It's interactive. They put some animation in as well. You can drill down and play around with it. And I want to thank you both for taking the time and having a discussion about all these topics. Really appreciate the work. And I know Jonathan's on there. We didn't have any questions, but Jonathan, what's on for tomorrow?
We're switching gears up tomorrow. It's all about eating locally. We have Bar Marco and Footprint Farms.
So that's nice. That's nice. Restaurants, yes, and farm to table. Excellent. Well, stay safe, everyone. Enjoy the day. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you, Leon, Rich.
Thanks, Audrey.
My pleasure. Take care.
Take care.